thank you, all of you, for coming. And am I projecting? Can you hear me in the back? No? Yes? Kind of? Well, I'm hard of hearing, so I'll shout so I can hear myself, and then maybe you'll hear me. I really am delighted to be here, and I want to second what Nadia said about community colleges. One of the great crises that we're facing in this country is the full-scale attack on public education. And that attack has been a K-12 attack, but it's also a community college, state college, and now higher ed university attack. And we have to, that's one of the things I'd love to talk about today if you're interested in that, because I think that we have to find a larger voice to fight back against the assault on public education. Public education is the lifeblood of democracy, and a place like this is not just inspiration, it's the actual practical work of building democracy. I liked also the way you began. You know, I think the essence of democracy is learning to talk to strangers. That it's not enough to have good ideas and sit on your couch smoking a joint thinking how cool you are. I mean, you're cool, don't get me wrong. You're definitely cool. But it's not enough. If you have ideas that are worth having, and if you can imagine a world worth living in, then you have to talk to strangers. And it's not enough to talk to the folks you agree with and just kind of, we all agree we're good people over here on the couch, pass the joint. We have to also say, let's go out and talk to people who we don't agree with. I'm thinking suddenly of the years of the Vietnam War, in which I was a very active person, and I'll tell you that story in a minute. But it became fairly routine for me to go on demonstrations and to get arrested and to hang out with my friends, talking about how horrible war was. What was much harder was 3 summers in a row going to Detroit and in a project called Vietnam Summer and knocking on doors of people I didn't know and kind of trying to get people to sign a petition or to have a conversation about war. And I don't know what it did for those people, but I know what it did for me. And what it did for me was to deepen my sense of what it is to live in a wildly diverse, open society in which people have different views and wildly different views. You know, I'd knock on one door and somebody would say, go back to Russia. And I'd think, geez, I've never been to Russia. How do I go back? But, you know, the idea that somehow if you were against the war, you were a communist, you know. And then I'd knock on another door and someone would say, my cousin was killed in Vietnam last month and I'm devastated. Would you come in and we'll talk? So it was like an education for me. And I think it would be an education for you to reach out and talk to folks who don't agree with you or who don't automatically agree with you and find a way to have that communication. For all those reasons, thank you, Nadia, and thank you for having me, and thank you for coming. I know some of you are here being coerced to be here, right? It's a class, right? I mean, that's coercion. I mean, it's okay. You'll get a B or whatever you'll get. But I think it's interesting sometimes to think about the difference between schooling and education. Schooling is always about certification. It's always about, you know, getting a grade. And I used to say to my students when I taught at the University of Illinois, if I put a sign up on campus saying Ayres will be here from 5 to 8 on Wednesday, if you want to talk, you won't get any credit and he won't get paid, how many of you would come? And I always had 2 students that say I would come, and I'd always, oh, thank you. But mostly we wouldn't come. You know, so we're kind of, even though we're choosing to be students, and even though we're choosing to come and get a degree and be part of an educational establishment, still, in a way, there's a coercion if it's all about certification. So for the next 2 hours, let's suspend disbelief and make it educational in spite of its certification overtones. We'll try to ignore those. Let me ask you, how many of you are either teacher, how many of you are faculty here? How many of you are faculty or staff here? Okay, how many of you are students here? Everybody else, damn. How many of you came under your own free will? No, I'm not going to ask that. I'm not going to ask that. I'm not going to ask that. How many of you are going to be teachers? Hooray. I'm going to speak all to you. And how many of you are going to be, what does a political scientist do? No, I'm just kidding. Some of you are, how many of you are majoring in political science? Sociology, journalism. Did you know there's no jobs in journalism? Okay, good. I don't want to disabuse you of your major, but damn. All right. I thought I'd talk just for a few minutes just to get us started about some of the themes I'm going to dilate later tonight at the University of Oregon. But I'll start there, and mainly I want to provoke you to have a conversation with me. This room is not built for conversation. Again, I applaud Nadia for making us turn around. But these seats don't facilitate turning around. This auditorium is built with the assumption that knowledge is here and ignorance is there. Now, I know it's not true, and you know it's not true. You know that you have a lifetime of experience, that there's a ton of wisdom in the room. And that's why I would like to, in spite of this physical environment, I would like to have a dialogue. I'd like to have a conversation. And all dialogue, when it's done right, involves listening with the possibility of being changed and speaking with the possibility of being heard. But it's always a little disruptive. Real dialogue makes you uneasy because it's not predictable. You know, it's like not a multiple choice, test. I don't get to choose. So I would love for you, each of you, to be thinking, what is it I want to utter in this conversation? And what is it I want this guy to talk about? I mean, we're here, so let's make it useful to you. And not just a performance or something fun for me. And it is, incidentally, really fun for me to be here, but that's not the whole point. So let me say a few things and see if we can have a real conversation over time. Part of what I'm thinking about is you as students, you as potential teachers, you as faculty. I think that, and I said, I think education is at the core of democracy. But by that I mean not schooling. What I mean is the ability to develop a mind of your own, to sort through evidence and come to your own conclusions, to develop the ability to see the world as if it could be otherwise. That's essential to being an educated person. And I think a lot about what does it mean to be an educated person. And in part I think of it in terms of contradictions, because I'm thinking about, for example, the Wizard of Oz, right? In the Wizard of Oz, the four seekers are skipping down the yellow brick road, and you remember the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, and Dorothy, and Toto, don't forget Toto. And they're going down the yellow brick road, and finally, after all the obstacles they've overcome, they finally get to the wizard, right? They finally are in the castle where the wizard lives. And Toto pulls back the curtain and exposes the wizard as a complete fraud. So everything they'd done for all those days on the yellow brick road, turns out, was for nothing, because the guy's just a crank with a machine making himself look bigger. I think that is a fantastic metaphor for, education in a certain way. Who is the wizard? And do we really need wizards? And at the end of the day, the four skipping down the yellow brick road look at each other and say, I guess since he doesn't have the answers, what are the answers? Do you remember what the wizard does? The wizard, among other things, says to the Scarecrow, who's the guy who doesn't have a brain, and he's just heartbroken because he was coming to get a brain. And the wizard says, you're smarter than most people who have PhDs. And you remember, the Scarecrow really is the smartest. He's the problem solver in the group. The Cowardly Lion is the bravest. The Tin Man is the most sentimental, the most emotional. So the contradictions are all there. But he says to the Scarecrow, you're smarter than most people who have PhDs. All you don't have is a degree. And then he produces a THD, a Doctor of Thinkology. And the Scarecrow says, E equals MC squared. Well, in a way, what it points to for me is not just the metaphor of why the wizard is not really our goal or our aspiration, but the idea that it's within us. It's within us to solve the problems that face us. It's within us collectively and individually to think differently about ourselves and to ask ourselves, what are we lacking in terms of confidence so that we can actually recognize our own wisdom? How many of you know, think of some of the public figures we have to endure. How many of you know an educated fool? That's a very common phrase. I know a ton of them. They got the big degrees, they went to Harvard, and they're little moral midgets, and you wouldn't want to, have a beer with them, for Christ's sake, but you wouldn't want to do anything with them. You don't trust them. You have to learn to trust yourself. We have to learn to trust ourselves. I don't know why this comes to mind, but we just went through a mayoral election in Chicago. And you may know that we elected Mayor Rahm Emanuel. And every time I think of it, I want to jump off a bridge, but don't get me started. In any case, he's President Obama's former chief of staff, former congressman, and so on. And he's trying to rule the city like any autocrat would, and he's crazy. But in any case, all the progressives were trying to figure out what's the alternative to Rahm Emanuel. And I kept saying at every meeting where this was discussed, why do we need a mayor? And everybody looked at me like I was out of my mind. Like, what would we do without a mayor? Right. What would we do without a mayor? I mean, what does the mayor do? Cuts ribbons, opens business. I don't know. What does the mayor do? And the reason it was a fun thing to play with, I'm not sure we could live without a mayor, but in my mind I can live without a mayor, and I kind of like the idea of challenging us to say, what are we lacking in confidence? What are we not seeing? Where is our radical imagination? And can we claim to be thinking people if we don't nourish our radical imagination? So let me give you another example, which I always raise, and I think we should abolish all the prisons. I want somebody to challenge me, please. You don't agree with that. Yes?
Why do you feel that way? Why do you would be better?
Well, I feel it would be better because we wouldn't be investing billions and billions of dollars in an enterprise that cages people for no real productive social purpose. I think we should invest, for example, in Illinois. In the last 20 years, we've spent $500 million on prison construction and exactly nothing on university construction. That's a recipe for catastrophe down the road. That's a recipe for a disaster. Abolish the prison. Somebody please challenge me. Yes, good.
I'm sure that you're right. The vast majority of people could be dealt with in a much more humane way. There are some people, however, that probably do need some...
Give me a name. Give me a name. Okay, I got a name. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer. And so I want to agree with you. We need one prison cell. Anybody else? Okay, I'll give you George Bush. Okay, that's two. Anybody else? No, I'm just teasing. You know I'm teasing. But I'm just teasing. But the reason I like to start there is because, of course, there are people like Jeffrey Dahmer. In fact, I have a wonderful comic book. Have you seen the comic book, My Friend Dahmer? If you're a big enough comics freak, you've seen it. And I'm a huge comics freak. Okay, so yes, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy. Okay, I get that. 2.5 million of your fellow citizens and residents are living in a cage. Does that make sense? Could we rethink, respin the thing and say, sure, I'm being an idiot, I'm being a provocateur by saying abolish the prisons, sure. But could we imagine 100 alternatives to incarceration, and then at the end of that road is incarceration, rather than the default position being break the law, go to prison. Make the mistake, go to prison. Why is that the default position? So again, no mayor, no prisons. I'm making this up. I mean, and I'm not asking you to endorse any of it. But I'm saying, and let me add another one. Let's close all 150 U.S. foreign bases, all of them. Let's close every U.S. foreign base. You probably know this, but you know, the red is what we spend on war, on military and related. That's our budget next year. That's what your taxes, and over here, that's what we spend on education. That's a recipe for absolute catastrophe in the long run. How do we get away with this? And incidentally, I don't know if you wept on tax day, but I did. And my daughter-in-law wrote me this morning. She's an artist. She's a novelist and a poet. And she wrote me this morning in a purple rage because her tax rate is 37%. Mitt Romney's is 12, and Barack Obama's is 20, and hers is 37. And she makes this much money, right, as an independent artist. But So there's something crazy. You were going to say something about taxes.
Can you imagine a post-economic world?
Yes, I can. Not only can I imagine it, I want you to kind of flesh that out at some point. Not only, I mean, I think we have to imagine. The interesting thing about your imagination is that, and each of you has one, we all have them. And the great thing about your imagination is it is the gateway to freedom. It's the gateway to moral behavior, right? So we can all imagine the end of the world. Can't you imagine the end of the world? Can you see the movie? Yeah, we know how it ends. And it's not pretty. But can you imagine the end of the jobs system or the end of the economic system as we know it? Or can you imagine the end of prisons? And the reason I put it in those stark terms is it's kind of fun to think, shit, I can think of the end of the world. I saw that movie, or I saw several movies where the world ended. But I can't think of the end of capitalism, or I can't think of the end of, you know, a social system that ties me. And I say the jobs system pointedly, because I think too often we get, this is a question of framing, which is something I think about a lot. We get trapped into talking about more jobs. So you may have seen Bill Clinton. I got my little Occupy button on. Bill Clinton went to the Occupy site and he said, I think it's mostly good, but mostly a good thing, but they better get behind Barack Obama's jobs program, 2 million jobs. And I'm immediately shaking because Rahm Emanuel has a jobs program. You know what it is? Casinos and prisons. Is that really where we're headed? Casinos and prisons, and we're all going to applaud because it's jobs? I want to make a work program. But by that I mean there is so much work to do in this world, so much productive work, that you and I, we could mobilize ourselves in this room, get busy, and never stop working for the rest of our lives and do good things in the world. Make the infrastructure, take care of the young. My favorite, take care of the old people, please. I'm trying to interest more of you in elder care. I'm 68, so damn. But you know, there's so much good work to do. Why do we get reduced into thinking of it as simply jobs? How do we restructure so that good work is kind of what powers us? You want to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to say that.
Say it loud.
Isn't the reason cited for needing jobs, or money really, that we would not work if we didn't have that incentive?
You know, the question is, do you think we would not work if we didn't have the incentive of money? And my short answer is, look at a 3-year-old. Look at my grandkids. They work themselves to exhaustion. I just came back from Guatemala, where I went to language school. Have you ever done that? Have you ever? I mean, some of you are English is your second language, but those of you who've tried to speak another language, for some of you, English is your second language. There's nothing more exhausting than immersing yourself in trying to learn a language. So I look at my 3-year-old granddaughter. No wonder she's exhausted at the end of every day. I was exhausted at the end of every day, and I didn't actually get there. I can't actually speak Spanish. But I think you look. The short answer is look at a 3-year-old. We are geared to work, but we're also kind of tied into a job system which actually doesn't allow us to imagine work differently. So for me, I mean, I'll just spin out one other idea, which is, for me, the problem with the way we have work and money and so on set up is we are basically saying that the ideal from the point of the worker is income with no work. The ideal from the point of view of the owner is profit with no workers. That's a crazy system, and that drives kind of the conflict again and again. Why can't we imagine that work is good for us as human beings? That work is actually humanizes us. It makes us more human. Some of you, I know that some of you have a garden. Nobody's actually giving you a lot of money. Some of you actually recycle. Some of you actually volunteer. Why the hell do you volunteer? Who incentivized you to volunteer? It makes you a better human being. You believe in it. You are an amateur in it. And I'm a big fan of being an amateur, not a professional. Amateurs do things for passion and commitment. That's why you play the piano. You're never going to get to Carnegie Hall. I'm sorry, you might get to Carnegie Hall, but I'm not I'm never going to be, you know, point guard for the Bulls. Maybe, but probably not anymore. I wanted to for a long time. But the point is that we do what we do out of many, many motivations, and money is the most base, and in many ways the least worthy. That doesn't mean we don't need money, but we do indeed need to learn to live differently if we're going to live at all, because the world we live in, not just the 1% and the 99%, although I'd love to talk about that, but a world where the United States makes up how much of the world population? Do you know, percentage-wise? U.S.? You got 5?
4.5.
Yeah, it's 4.5. But 5 is a good guess. 4.5% of the world's population, consuming 35% of the world's oil, making up half of the world's military budget. How long can that go on? You know, with realistically, if we want to live in a world at peace and in balance. So yeah, I mean, and frankly, I hope you guys are the exception. But we as Americans, because of that great privilege, you know what I mean by privilege, right? I mean, everybody has some, and everybody suffers some. I mean, the human condition is to suffer. But I got on my bike 3 days ago and rode from the south side of Chicago up the lake to the university. And when I came outside, I said, gosh, it's a windy day. I'm going to have a miserable time on the lake. Then I got on the lake and the wind died and I just zoomed downtown. And I thought, man, that was cool. And then I turned around and I realized, holy crap, the wind was at my back and getting home is going to be hell. Now, some of you are bikers and you know what I mean. When the wind is at your back, you don't feel it. It's completely invisible. But when the wind is in your face, you're well aware of it. That's the way privilege works. So we are privileged, actually, to be Americans. Men are privileged in certain ways. You know, heterosexual folks are, you know, privileged in other ways. White people, you know, I was going to say old people, but then I rethought that. My pension's being cut. But you know, yeah, we all enjoy certain privileges. And one of the things that privilege does is it anesthetizes you. It puts you to sleep. And the way it works is like the wind at your back on a bike. Clear example for me, petty, simple example, is that when I was first teaching at the University of Illinois at Chicago, a big, urban, ugly university, I taught a class from 5 to 8 on Tuesdays. And at 8 o'clock, class was over and we all disappeared, or so I thought. It took me a few weeks to notice that the women got together in the back of the class and went to the train or the parking lot together. Why did they do that? Why did the women bond together to walk outside in this urban... Why? For safety, of course, absolutely. Why did I not notice it? I'm not a bad person, honest. So why didn't I notice it? Because I had the wind at my back, and I had the privilege of not noticing what all the women knew instinctively, and which they organized themselves. Well, as soon as I noticed it, I had a responsibility to do something about it. So once I woke up, once the anesthesia was taken away, I had to do something. And that's very much the situation we are all in. So National Geographic did a survey of 18 to 25-year-old American kids and said, and gave them a blank world map and asked them to identify countries. Astonishing. 80% couldn't find Iraq. We've only fought there for a decade, right? Or Afghanistan, a decade. 80% couldn't find Iraq. 80% couldn't find Israel, Palestine. And something like 40% couldn't find Great Britain, and 12% couldn't find the United States. And I'll tell you why you laughed at that, because I laughed at that too. I can find the United States. I feel damn proud of it. But could I find the others? Not so much. I mean, take Iraq. Could you draw right now? And I'm not challenging you because I think it's in our condition. It's a failure of a lot of things, but it's also a result of privilege. Could you draw a freehand sketch of Iraq and identify the major cities and the major battlefields, Fallujah and Baghdad and so on? And could you identify, you know, the surrounding countries and the bodies of water? Could you? Could you? I don't want you to. But my point is simply that we should be aware that we are being blinded to certain things, and we can't actually be moral actors in the world if we don't open our eyes and try to peel away from that blindness. Yes, ma'am.
You've done traveling.
Say it again?
You have done world traveling.
A little,
I believe.
not much.
And you mentioned visualizing a post-economic There are many countries on the face of the earth that are virtually still dealing in barter. You see how stunted their lifestyle is. It doesn't change the human condition. We all still seek to be rewarded for what we produce. And my question to you is, if you really visualize that post-capitalistic world, why do you not do what you do for free? Why do you have taxes to pay?
Oh, no, I do a lot of what I do for free. Most of the important work I do for free, although it's true, we all live in this system. So, yeah, I write books and people buy the books and I get a nickel for each book you buy. Please buy a lot of my books.
You literally, in the United States of America,
Yeah.
could choose to do what you do,
Right.
but you don't.
Well, listen, I don't disagree with you that we are all in this system. So I don't take that
But
personally.
why do you criticize it if you live in it?
Because I want to change it. I think we should change it. For example, I think we are taxing the wrong people and spending on the wrong things. That's what I think. So I want to change that. And I'm happy to pay more taxes if we could change the system. But it's not just a matter of my personal behavior either. It's a matter of a system that functions on its own, with or without my goodwill and my, thoughtfulness, or your thoughtfulness or goodwill.
I volunteer myself and my own time, but I have a reason that I volunteer because I know that if I don't volunteer, somebody else is going to demand tax money to do what other people could and should be doing. And I respect the fact that people work hard for their money, and so to prevent people from being taken for granted and giving more taxes to services, we volunteer to help offset that. But that's only because I respect the people that work hard for their money.
Well, I respect people who work hard too, and with or without money, I respect you for volunteering. And I even respect your position criticizing the tax system. But don't you think when you say I respect people who work hard for their money, and you're worrying about, my money, what about George Romney? Does he work hard for his money?
Actually, he's done some very innovative things where he's protected companies, and I don't want to go into it.
I know. Let's not go into it, but I get your point.
Yeah,
So
no,
you're pretty much against taxes.
I'm a free market capitalist.
Okay. So how did you drive here today? What road?
I drove here on a road that was paid for by taxes that come from purchasing tires and fuel.
So you drove here on a socialist road?
I drove here on a road that was paid for by taxes.
By government. It's a government road. And you approve of that, spending. So the government should be taxed, we should be taxed to pay for infrastructure.
Correct.
And so for ports like the Port of Seattle, we should be taxed for that port, even though the people who are going to benefit from it are overwhelmingly people with huge means, more than you and I are going to benefit, but still, we don't mind being taxed for it, and I don't mind being taxed for it. So could we agree, since we're both kind of critical of the tax system, could we agree that we should close the Pentagon?
Close the Pentagon?
Close the Pentagon. Look how much we'd save. Let me show you.
A lot of universities, but that's my opinion.
Well, that's exactly it. So you think we should close universities, and I think we should close this. So that's a real discussion. That's not a discussion about whether I'm a big tax guy and you're a small tax guy. We both want to tax and we both want to spend, but you want to spend on the Pentagon and I want to spend on this community college.
No, Pentagon would be far. First of all, we
Let's have the Pentagon privatized. I'm sorry?
Then we can talk about the Pentagon.
Say it again.
First, we close the United Nations building. Then we can talk about
The United Nations takes this much. The Pentagon takes this. It's like
but we pay the world's fee for keeping the United Nations building open.
Right.
Because generally
That's a
we
legitimate
subsidize-
discussion. That's a legitimate discussion. Some of us think that the idea of building, peace through negotiation and conversation and things like the United Nations with all of its problems is a good idea. Some of us think the Pentagon is a good idea. But this is a real conversation.
I can't speak to the Pentagon.
Say it again?
I can't really speak to the Pentagon because I don't know what they do, but I do know stuff that goes on in the United Nations because I do study it.
Okay, study the Pentagon, the most wasteful bureaucracy on earth. But all I'm saying to you, and I don't want to, continue just you and I, but all I'm saying to you is the conversation about tax who and spend on what is a legitimate conversation in a democracy. I want to spend on education, I want to take away all student debts, and I want to spend on health care. And other people, and I understand that other people want to spend on incarceration and surveillance and war. Those are different priorities, and I think, well, I'm not saying it's not one or the other. We can debate it. But in a reasonable, legitimate democracy, that debate should go on. One of the things, I'll just give you one of my other crazy, nourishing the radical imagination ideas, which we can then beat the crap out of if you'd like to, like the Self or Jeffrey Dahmer. One of my other ideas, which I've thought about and written about a lot, is I think we should have universal service at the age of 18. Everyone who's 18 does a year of service. And then at 28, everyone does a year of service. And 38 and 48 and 58, okay, 68, I'm 68. I'll do a year of service. Everyone should do a year of service. But we shouldn't conflate the word service with military service. We should say, as a community, we're going to name 6 or 8 areas of service. And you can name your top 3, and when you're 18, you got to do one of those 3. You could have elder care, you could have, why do I keep coming back? Okay, you know why I keep coming back. Take care of the old people, daycare, work in an emergency room, work on infrastructure, build community gardens, or go into the military. It could be one. It would not only focus our attention, it would bring to reality the participatory nature of what an authentic democracy does, which is we decide what service is, and then we voluntarily go into that. And let's just see how many people go to the Pentagon and how many go to the gardens. Well, that's voting with your feet. It focuses your attention. Yes, ma'am. You.
Oh, I was going to comment.
Please comment loudly.
That if you were to step away from this society or this culture, then you probably wouldn't be here talking to us. I just noticed that, like, some people who, like, choose not to participate in this culture, like, may not be asked or, like, sought after to talk in a public setting like this.
So if they've dropped out kind of completely, that kind of thing?
Yeah, they may not have, like, the sort of relations.
And that's okay.
In rooms with, like,
sure.
not to be crude, but I was just thinking.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Up here, yeah. Very loud because I'm old.
To pay the taxes for tires and fuel and road use.
So
which road is that?
Is if it was a privatized road because there were no taxes, would you have still driven on it?
To enable to have the road, there would still have to be support for it, and so I would still be paying the taxes on tires and fuel.
But you would still willingly come here and driving on the privatized road, right? So basically what I'm saying is the reason that you chose to drive on this socialist road that's paid for by taxes, right, is that you really don't have much of a choice at this point. So given the choice to privatize roads, you would still use them, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, up here. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Very loud, please.
I was just going back to the information, about the Pentagon, right now for the fiscal year of 2015, that, Obama administration was tossing the idea of $1 billion tax cut to the Pentagon, since we're talking about that. And the major argument in Congress was that it would affect jobs, and the reality is that $1 billion tax cut to the Pentagon would create a 153% increase in jobs. More teachers would be able to have extended one-year contracts instead of having to do term-by-term contracts at community colleges. More people would be actually actively working instead of being on a 99-week plus extension of unemployment.
Yes, it's a dangerous,
That's
yes.
just since 1999. That is insane.
Cancel the debt. That's, yeah, I agree with you completely. Cancel the student loans.
I
Huh?
think it ought to cancel the union
Uncle
contract.
Bob was around in 99.
The idea came around as a brilliant freaking notion for the loss of jobs was to send everybody back to school. And that's when it shot up.
Educate yourself. I can't do it for you.
Yes, sir. Somebody else had a hand up over here. Okay, let's listen up. We got one and then two. Go ahead, loudly, for them.
Okay, so you said you would close the unaccountable schools.
I just put it as a hypothetical, yeah.
How about Congress itself?
Great idea. He wants to close Congress. Direct democracy, yes.
Solutions and ideas for solutions, and not dwell on beating up what we already know is the problems, and so that you have some more proposed solutions that we can discuss today. Less
In what realm? In what area?
we can start with economics, we can start with politics, we can start with cultural problems, conflicts that we have. Those would be three that I would be interested in.
Sure. Do you want to begin? I mean, you want to weigh in on one of those?
Well, currently,
I mean, he raised politics. He said close Congress, but
well, I'll stay on that theme then. I would like to hear some possible solutions on how we can change the current approach to electing officials, and can we change how petitions are initiated?
you want to say?
A couple of things.
Say it loudly.
Yeah, a couple things. One is, of course, there's the move to amend. Of course, we ran into that over the peace symposium last weekend. But beyond that, there's something in our area called the Emerald Valley Time Exchange, where you exchange time to help somebody with something, and they give you time back. Now, you could actually use some sort of printed material, some sort of printed script. Basically, the concept of being everybody's time is worth the same amount. One of the problems of the current economic system that we have right now is that time is valued at different levels, causing a great deal of inequality. So, if you have, and of course they have this in New York, they have their own private script that can be used within certain areas. But you could develop that from what we already have here. And in terms of trying to get away from a capitalist system, if you had it so that everybody's time was valued at the same, you'd be a good step towards the future towards that.
Can I comment on what he just said?
Oh, let's see if anybody else wants to comment, because you've had several comments. Anybody? Yes, yes, okay. I'm sorry, over here, yeah?
Oh, I just said, I don't have anything to say about that. I have a question for you. You made a statement a while ago that I felt provocative and very interesting, and I'd like to ask you to elaborate on what you meant. And I'd like other people to be quiet and respectful when somebody has the floor. Thank you.
True.
Yeah, so I'm very interested in that statement and to hear you expand on that.
I'm going to say a word. I had said something like imagination is the gateway to morality or a moral life. And she wanted me to elaborate on that. And I'll do that, and then I'll get back to your political reformation thing. What I meant by that is that standing right next to the world as such, the world that we know, is a possible world, a world that could be, and maybe a world that should be. And you have to be able to tease out of the world as such, or your imagination, alternatives. And if you can't think of alternatives, it's very hard to make moral choices. And here's what I mean. Y'all are against slavery, right? Are you sure? Say it loud. Oh, thank you. I was worried you were all half asleep. Okay, let's hear it again. You're against slavery, right?
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Good for us.
What is forced service then? You want people to serve every 10 years. What is that going on?
Say it again.
You wanted people to serve every 10 years, to do service from the 28th and the 38th and the 48th. What is that? It's not slavery.
Okay, you may be right. So that's why I'm asking people, are you against slavery? And so far they've said yes, but I'll get to you in a second, okay? So people are against slavery, right? In 1840, if you were against slavery in this country, you were against the Constitution, the founders, the law, the Bible, your preacher, your parents, your friends, and neighbors. But let's just agree, we're all good people. We were all abolitionists in 1840, right? You're all for a woman's right to vote, right?
Yes.
I'm glad that the men stood up. Damn. I was worried it was only going to be the women. You're for a woman's right to vote, right? But if you were for a woman's right to vote 100 years ago, you were against the Constitution, the founders, the Bible, your preacher, your parents, your neighbors, and your friends. Let's just say we would have all been diehard suffragettes. I raised those two questions to say, what is invisible to us now? What are we not seeing that's right in front of our faces? And is there an alternative to what we're seeing? And could we discuss and have a conversation about those alternatives? That's what leads you to be able to say, and the reason it's important, the reason that it's important is because we have to make a distinction between personal virtue and ethical behavior. I don't think any of us today would say that a slave owner in Alabama who paid his bills and didn't beat his wife was a moral person. Today, would we say that? We would say no. He might have been a virtuous person in terms of the context of his times, but he actually lived in an immoral society. And as Henry David Thoreau said when he was behind bars, the only place for a free man in a slave state is jail. Now, that was Thoreau. I mean, okay, I know Thoreau's problematic in his own way, but okay, that's the question. The question is to make a distinction between personal virtue and social ethics. So I raised the question of slavery and the question of suffrage simply to say, what are we blind to that is just there? What are we not seeing? So my beloved mother, who passed away a decade ago, about 30 years ago, I was taking care of her, a very privileged woman. I was taking care of her. She had broken her ankle, and we were chatting, and she knows better than to ask me certain things, but she said, innocently enough, what is this thing I've heard about called global warming? And I gave her a very mild explanation. I didn't want to scare the shit out of my mother. And she said, and she gave me a long, cold stare, and she said, I'm sorry I asked. Well, exactly. Because you asked, now you feel obliged to do something. And that's where ethics comes in. That's where social ethics plays a role. So I want you all to be personally virtuous. Tell the truth. Show up to class. Do your homework. Okay, or don't do your homework, whichever you want. But, you know, do the right things as a person. But don't ignore the invisibility of common sense, the invisibility of what's here. So imagine 30 years from now, some of you young folks, your granddaughter says to you, you know, is it true that when you were a kid that the first African-American president was elected? And you could say, oh yes, and I was in Chicago at Grant Park. Nobody knows if you were there or not. Just say you were. No, be honest. Tell the truth. But okay, say, oh yes, 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 blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry? I was too. I didn't see you. Where were you? I didn't see you at all. Amazing. I actually found the place where I had the shit kicked out of me 40 years earlier and went to jail and burst into tears. But in any case, okay, so your granddaughter then says to you, but is it true that it cost him $500 million to win the first time? And the second time he and his opponent both spent over $1 billion? And you'll say, oh, but I think he raised it on the internet. Yeah? And your granddaughter will say, you're an idiot. I mean, do you really think that's democracy? If you can buy an election, if you can just go out and spend cash and overwhelm it with that kind of corruption, you say, but the internet. Yeah, right. I'm not saying this will happen or even that it should happen, but I'm saying it's the kind of thing we should ask ourselves, is this the best we can do? Is this the best we can do? And maybe there's an alternative. Or your granddaughter will say to you, when you were in college and you were fighting to end the loans and, you know, the huge tuition rates and everything else, is it true that just a few miles away from your college, there were 10,000 men living in a cage? 2.5 million of your fellow citizens and residents were in prison? And you'll say, really? Was it that many? Yes, it's that many. more than any other, by proportion of population, more than any other country on earth. It's an astonishing reality. So is there no alternative to that? And that's what I'm saying. That's the dilation of my point. Is that?
Yeah, it just occurs to me that having radical imagination is the fundamental challenge to systems of oppression and to systems that want to tell us how it is to be.
Yeah.
Whether these are religious institutions or
I agree.
whatever. And then often those people, very simply, can take the moral high road and say, morality, it's like there's no trust that we can generate out of our radical imaginations. That very phrase would be challenging and threatening to these interests. Because they see morality as something that can only be exercised or someone can only have if they adopt
A code.
this.
Yeah. Look, I think the codes, I think the codes and the systems can be useful as starting points. The problem is they don't answer the real world problems. And so my mother, I mean, she could say, I'm a moral person, but she might better say, I'm a conventional person. In other words, most Spartans act like Spartans. Most Athenians act like Athenians. Most Americans act like Americans, for better or for worse. And when we look back at history, we all see that we would be against slavery and for abolition. We all see that we would be for a woman's right to vote. We'd all be, marching with Martin Luther King today. But when it mattered, were we? And then the question is, what matters today? I mean, we're living in an environmental catastrophe. We're living in a war culture that's just gone absolutely, without bounds. And this is a problem that we have to think about. Okay, I'm going to I haven't gotten back to you, man. I'm going to call on your buddy. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, go ahead. Well, he was pointing at you, and so I'll take you.
Well, you talk about what's invisible. And to me, there are many things that are invisible, but one that really stands out is that every year there are billions of animals that live in intensive confinement throughout their lives.
Absolutely.
And then they're slaughtered, and people will eat the eggs or drink the milk or eat the meat that comes from that system. People who wouldn't take a baseball bat in their hand and hit a chicken over the head will still participate in the violence by eating the egg. And there's a lot more suffering by being caged up your whole life and still tying a cage than if you were just by a bat a few times. And people participate now, but they're blind to it.
Yeah.
Because it's uncomfortable to think about. When someone like me says something, there is a tendency to you don't know what you're talking about, or shut up, or that sort of thing. To perpetuate that blindness so people can feel comfortable. That's just one of many examples.
I think it's an excellent example. Yes, sir.
So, isn't this the greatest time philosophy alive? Haven't we actually...
Let me see you. Go ahead.
Haven't we actually just built up enough anger, angst, and power to maybe make a change? When the 60s were around, the 60s were a time bomb. And the reason why change occurred is because scary shit was happening. And people said, well, let's make a change. And then we got scared of doing anything. We built back porches. We quit sitting out front. And the streets got weird. And we quit talking to people about politics because, oh no, he might not agree with me. But it's beautiful. There's enough pressure here to do something. And hopefully there's some vision here to know what we should do. These are exciting times.
My quick response is to say that, I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist because I can't predict the future. I don't know if anything is built up to do anything. I have no idea. What I do know is that it's incumbent on each of us to get up every morning nourishing inside ourselves a kind of politics of confidence that we should speak up. We should speak out. We should open our eyes and speak out about the issues that matter to us. Speak out about the things that we care about. And if people marginalize you and make you feel foolish and humiliated, that's part of the game. That goes with the territory. And you wake up every morning with the confidence that you can make a difference. You speak up. with the idea that you can influence people or people can hear you. You listen with the idea that you can deepen your own understanding of the world. And I didn't talk about the torture of animals in my opening remarks. And so the brother up there, you know, added that in. That's good. That's what we should be doing. And then we'll have to wait and see. Nobody can predict the future. The day before Rosa Parks became Rosa Parks, nobody knew that was going to happen. And the day after, it seemed so obvious. It's inevitable. It had to happen. And the day before Occupy, you didn't know that was going to happen. And the day after, inevitable. And frankly, we could talk about Occupy endlessly, but frankly, one of the things that they accomplished almost immediately is they changed the frame of the discussion. So instead of, now we were suddenly interested in tax returns. You know, we weren't interested in that a minute ago, but now we are, because they had the wisdom to reframe the issue. You know, we've been talking about taxes. That's a great example of a framing. For 3 decades, we've been talking about tax relief. And the only question is, how much tax relief? Let's debate that. How much? This much, that much. If instead we were talking about social investment, then the question would be, how much social investment? In what? From whom? And that's a different conversation. So I'm eager for you to use your energy and imagination to get up every day and get busy, talk to neighbors, talk to strangers, and see what we can accomplish. Yes?
Yeah, going to the imagination and the future. I don't want to start a debate here, but I'd like to invite those who cling to a traditional paradigm of capitalism to imagine what the future might be like in 50, 75 years as automation continues to improve our lives in some ways technologically, but removes the need for labor force. And population increases to over 10 billion in 40 years. And medical advances extend lives and maybe bumps that number up again. When we come to a day, there might be a little Jetsons out there, so too far, but a point in time where we have so many people on this planet and we don't have jobs. The system itself will not, we won't need jobs. For those who still cling to a capitalist mindset, I invite you to imagine how you can restructure capitalism to fit that potential future problem. And with that in mind, we're facing problems today. So we can keep trying to fix yesterday's problems today, or we can start thinking about what tomorrow might be and make that a plan of action to move towards the future with that in our sights.
You know, I mean, I think that was really, really well said. But you know, one of the things that it makes me think about is that we have to reimagine both work and consumption. We have to think hard about. And the first time this ever came into my purview is I read a speech by Martin Luther King in 1966. I was old enough to read speeches by Martin Luther King in 1966, and King said, "We are living in a way that is based on the past, not the future." He said we should have a 30-hour work week or a 20-hour work week, and we should use the rest of the time for both recreation and social good. And it so blew my mind. I thought, geez, this is the world I'm going toward. What a great imagination that is. And of course, I went into a world where working a 40-hour week was somebody's dream of a nice idea, because we were working 50, 60, 80-hour weeks. And yet King was right. Why do we have to be on this treadmill where we're consuming at a rate that, you know, in a lot of ways, just bringing in the kind of end of oil and the environmental catastrophe that we are facing, and we are right on the precipice. This is something that we need to be very serious about addressing, because 40, 50 years of escalating expansion is the end of the earth. So, I mean, it's something I really applaud the way you put that. That was very good. And we've got one. Okay, we've got one over here, and then, yes.
I actually should have left like 5 minutes ago,
But I'm glad you stayed.
But I would like to know, you mentioned everybody, you know, should have to do a year of service every 10 years.
Yeah, he raised that too.
And that kind of a thing. And then you said that slavery is against your moral, ethical values.
Well, I think it's against all of our values.
I just kind of want to know how that's any different.
Yeah.
I see that if you're forced to, you know, to do service for a year when you don't want to, I see that as slavery.
So you were against the selective service system that drafted people into the Army.
Yes.
Me too. But the reason that, you know, I was throwing it out as a hypothetical, but it's not slavery, and it wouldn't be in the way that I said it. And the reason it wouldn't be is because it wouldn't be imposed on us. We would decide that that's what we wanted to do as a community. In a family, is it slavery if you say, you know, we're all going to get up on Saturday and go down to the park and do some cleanup? That's not slavery. That's a voluntary...
Adults who have free will are forced by their community to do something they don't want to do.
Like pay your taxes, or like obey the law, or like say.
If you believe in liberty, if there's one individual who doesn't want to volunteer, in a society of 200, 300 million people, that one individual should be free not to do so.
I disagree, and obviously I disagree, and the reason I disagree, although I'm a huge believer in participatory democracy and decentralized democracy, but the reason you're acting as if you are a complete free agent. You do whatever the hell you want, right? But you don't.
If I want to devote my life to art, but you want me to take a break every few years to go and...
It's just that, don't get too agitated. It was just a silly idea to raise a point, so don't get too excited. But your philosophy of saying you should do what you want and the community can't impose anything on you is a little bit nuts, and it's not even how you live. We have a contradiction in our society, and it's a contradiction we all live with. Personal liberty, social responsibility. And we balance those two through debate. So you have social responsibility. I'm sorry, you do.
No, ultimately you don't.
Yes, you do. You have to drive within the speed limit. You have to pay your bills.
Voluntarily choose to enter an association with others.
You voluntarily choose to go 55. What if I don't voluntarily choose to go 55? What if I... Say it again? That's not what I'm saying. You're missing the point completely, but I see you've latched onto this, so I'll drop it. It's all good. We don't have to do the year of service. I was comparing it to selective service. Okay, not that. But what about taxes? Should you pay your taxes? I mean, you're acting as if you're a complete free agent and you don't benefit at all from actually the social wealth that we have created socially. And you do. So I think you're barking up a mistaken tree, but I called on somebody else. Yes, here and then here, here and then here.
I just want to say that it sounds like the two different kind of situations. I feel as though in a capitalist, I just want to say this, but I feel like in a capitalist society, it's every man for themselves. And what I think some of us feel that in, you might want to call it socialism, whatever it is that you want to call it, it's about community, not everyone out for yourself. Your neighbor, my family members, my co-students here, my teachers, we're all part of the same community, all live here, and so we all need to, in a sense, think about each other together as a community.
Yeah.
So that whole concept of him, as you're playing it as slavery, I feel is that when you realize that we are all supporting each other, whether you're taking care of the old people or the gardens, you're doing that 1 year for your community.
But I don't want, look, I don't want you guys... 1 second. Don't get too excited about this little utopian thing I threw out. Let's all admit. Okay, but let's forget that little stupid idea. No, absolutely not. I don't feel that way at all. What I would rather raise is the larger question, which is all of us, and this is also a question of framing, all of us are both individuals and part of society. We do not exist in splendid isolation. So let's take one that'll really agitate us. Let's take healthcare. Don't you think that I have and you have a responsibility to take care of your own health, damn it? Don't you think? And your own family, damn it, right? And yet if somebody ran in here and said, somebody was just hit by a car, should we go help? We would thunder out there to help. So the question is, what is our responsibility to one another? We have laws in this country, for example, that if you go to an emergency room, they have to take care of you. That costs you more in taxes than anything that these liberals have thought up that they want to do. It costs you much more. The fact that these emergency rooms are the primary health care for the poor. It's insane. And couldn't we have a calmer and more thoughtful discussion about what is our responsibility to one another. Take schools. Shouldn't we have public schools? Rick Santorum says no. We have to get rid of the public schools and get rid of the public universities. Don't you think that going to school, far from a market operation, is actually a basic human right? You have a right to be educated. And we as a community have a responsibility to educate our young. So I think you're kind of barking up a silly tree here, and I'm going to call on several more people. Yes? I'm sorry?
You don't have the floor. You don't have the floor.
All right. I raise my hand like everybody else.
You're a good man.
You know, going back to what this gentleman was talking about what we were talking about, I mean, I think that's an excellent point. A great musician said, the strength of the tree begins in the roots. The part about this social movement that we got going on right now, please stay rooted, the tree shall flourish. I believe that will come our heart and soul. So, a tree might spray side to side, but as long as we water it and let loose of the mental slavery and try to remain as open-minded and as objective, I can choose to disagree or, disagree or what is it, agree to disagree. That's fine with me.
Sure.
This is American, and I believe in the core values of being an American, which is your right as much as my right to speak. All right? But
Cool.
I also don't stand in the grocery line, and when I get agitated because the check is moving a little bit slower, going to the cuts. For every self-checkout stand that was put in a grocery store, 3 people lost a job. 3 shifts were lost. For every person that uses those are the small choices that you can make on a day-to-day basis. That's not sorry.
Okay.
I'm going to start making.
We've got a little bit of time left, so I'm going to go back to the political thing just for a minute. And let me assure you that what I'm throwing out is just one aging hippie's ideas, and you don't have to endorse them at all, and it's just a way to provoke us to think. But I'd be interested in what people think about reforming the political system, for example, which was one of your issues. Am I correct? Okay. I would start myself with the view that we want universal suffrage. That's what we want. That's an ideal. That's a goal. Do people agree, pretty much, universal suffrage? Everyone should vote? Well, that means a lot of things practically. It means finding ways to get people for whom voting is not too easy, either because of transportation or physical condition or the circumstances of their lives, like maybe they work the shift from 6 a.m. till 8 p.m., that's a hard time then if you have to vote. So maybe we should think of the kind of reforms that could bring about universal suffrage. And what that means for me is things like doing away with felony disenfranchisement. I'm trying to provoke you. So because you commit a felony, does that mean you're no longer a citizen? Does it mean you're no longer a citizen? I think we should take ballots into prisons and let people vote. Why can they not vote? It's voting, they're just voting. You punish them by putting them in prison or by fining them. But why do you take away their citizenship? So that would be the kind of thing. Another thing that comes to my mind, and these are just popping off my head. Another thing is we ought to have instant runoff in the elections at all levels. And what instant runoff means is that you can vote for anybody. I could vote for you. I could vote for whoever. I probably would vote for you. And I could vote for you, and as soon as you don't make the threshold of being in the runoff, automatically the voting machine says, boom, my vote drops from you and goes to John McCain. And that way I can vote my real heart to begin with, and I can vote my head as a second. That's a simple kind of reform that anyone could do. We should get rid of the Electoral College. Are you kidding? I mean, people look at the Electoral College and they're like, are you kidding? Because we should want to believe that we can live in a society where your vote in Montana doesn't count for 10 times more than my vote in Chicago. I should have one person, one vote. The Electoral College is a holdover from slavery. It was to protect you know, the union against the kind of riffraff that was rising up. I kind of believe in the riffraff. I think that ordinary people, I think in a democracy, a core value of a democracy is that every human being is of incalculable value, and we are equal in political rights. That means everyone has the right to vote. Those would be just a couple of things I would do. Before you jump in, I'm sorry?
Proportional representation?
Yeah, proportional representation. And I think that the manipulation that we're witnessing right now is absolutely horrendous. And it's something that we should be wise about and oppose. But felony disenfranchisement would be my first move, because there's something deeply, deeply wrong about, if you think about the fundamental goal, or the fundamental tactical first line goals of the civil rights movement, it was voting and integrating the schools. The schools are more segregated in a city like Chicago than they ever were, and felony disenfranchisement has disenfranchised in the states where segregation outlawed blacks from voting. That has repeated itself through felony disenfranchisement. We need to get rid of it.
Can I say something?
In a minute, in a minute. You can in a minute. You had something, and then you.
Well, I thought it was really interesting because you had mentioned the idea of slavery, but then, like, what was it that people were saying we would be forced to do?
They were saying if we did a year of community service, that would be slavery.
That people, like, went straight to thinking that you would be forced.
Yeah, exactly.
Into doing something.
Instead of that it would be voluntary,
That
right?
it's possible. They have to. I just think it's great, though, that, like, people feel okay enough to speak out against force in this room when there's, like, so much force going on, like, in our culture.
Yeah.
So.
True. Good point. And then you had something, yes?
I just wanted to say that I've been down with the struggle, if you will.
My sympathies.
I had two ex-husbands who went to prison via the IRS because I attempted to think that we could win against the government, and we didn't. But I can tell you that if you haven't done a crime of murder or armed robbery and many of the other, you get your voting rights back when you apply for them once you are, yes, you do.
Not in some states. It's not true. It's a nice idea. Maybe that's true in Oregon.
Well, I can tell you from my situation in the state
You had how many husbands who went to jail? Damn. That's impressive, because I only had one wife who went to jail, and I'm impressed that you had.
We decided to take on
The IRS. I get it.
So for me, when you say these things, I'm saying, you know what? I paid the price, and I have issue with what you're saying, because are these people in this room who are idealistic, are they willing to go to prison for it? And generally, my
Absolutely.
Some of them are.
think they are?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but I'm sure your bona fides are huge, and I'm not arguing with your personal stand at all. So I don't want you to feel that I'm trying to single you out and say you're not.
But there's a whole lot of rhetoric.
I don't want to gut check anybody about what they're willing to do for their principles. It's very admirable that you stand and try to live by your principles. I think we all should. And so I'm not really fighting with you about what you did and what your husbands did. I mean, that's not my argument at all. And I think that we should imagine what our ideals are, and then we should try very hard to live by those ideals. And you've tried to live by yours. God bless you. They're trying to live by theirs. God bless them. Yes, sir.
A little slavery issue. A couple of things. One is, I can see some truth to both sides here. If someone feels they're being forced to do something they don't want to do, they have to take a year out of their career, they may experience that as a person. It can be very stressful and have an impact on their health and so on. On the other hand, yes, you do, I think, all have a social responsibility. But the main point I want to make is that if you're going to use the label slavery, a slavery system is where you're creating masters and slaves are dehumanized. And if everyone's taking part in doing their year, I don't think they're dehumanized. So I think a major element of the slave system is just not there. But I think there is a partial truth, like I say.
I'm actually very amazed and happy that somehow this little proposal has become the focus. That I thought it would be closing the prisons, but what do I know? Okay, we have just a little bit of time left, correct? So who else wants to get a word in edgewise? This gentleman over here, and this gentleman here, and this lady. Okay, we're going to just have 3 more comments, and I appreciate it. Yeah.
First of all, I didn't get that at all from what you were saying. It's clearly
right.
what you were saying is that everybody agrees with something, that it's not slavery.
Right.
Okay, we won't go there. But anyway, if we're going to go into something that we have to do, let's just talk about what's the difference between doing 1 year service now and all the slave things we do in our current system, and we're even completely not even neglecting to talk about today. We're way more slaves today in our society than we ever were doing something like that.
Good point. Well put. And then I had a couple up here. 1, 2. Yes. Yes. Thank you very much. Thanks.
My feeling on this whole issue of slavery and stuff like this, we need to not worry so much about the issue of slavery. We need to worry about the issue of slavery, taxation that our government's doing to us, along with the media, the way we got to educate ourselves, for so long we've been fingers at the government. It's time to take accountability as individuals for active liberty, instead of expecting other people to do it at the expense, right to sugarcoat of other individuals, then take the credit for it.
You're somebody who listens to Bob Marley, right? Because I could hear him. I could hear the echoes. Beautiful. 1 more comment, and then I'll say a last word.
One of the things I like about what you said is to think about how in the past, history of the way we treated other people and what you stood up for and what you should stand up for today. And I think the way we treat our gay and lesbian community in this country is very wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that is something people need to speak out about and to change because it's not right.
Agreed. Agreed. In fact, I think that a lot of the folks who, you might think are traditionally on the right and would find that, hateful, actually do believe in individual liberty and people should have a right to do what they want to do. I was having a conversation with a Tea Party guy who was wearing a Ron Paul t-shirt a year ago, and I asked him if we couldn't agree on a couple things like full queer rights, and he said, absolutely. I said, even the right to marry. And he said, not marriage. Why should the state be involved in your relationship? And I said, I agree. No marriage. No marriage for anybody by the state. If you want to get married, go talk to your friends. But we agreed about that, even though I've been married for 40 years. I apologize. In any case, let's leave and hang around and talk for another 5 or 10 minutes. But I have 2 kind of takeaways from our conversation. And one is to think hard about this issue that was raised near the end, about how are you going to live your life in a way that it doesn't make a mockery of your values. How are you going to live your life in a way that's consistent with what you believe your ethical responsibility to yourself and your community and your society is, and your world? How do you do that? And that is a thunderingly difficult moral standard to live up to. Live your life so that it doesn't make a mockery of your values. And the second thing I think we should take away is to think hard about the individual and the group, because there's no doubt that deep in our DNA as a country is individual liberty, but deep in our DNA is social responsibility. That's what democracy requires. Saying social justice, which I think is in the title of what they advertise, saying social justice is no different than saying democracy. In a democracy, we take responsibility for one another in some ways, and it's a debate how we work that out, the individual and the group, me and us. That's a debate. So let's think hard about that, and let's keep talking about it. But thank you all for coming. It was a pleasure to be here.